shiny touch as the other one. So
that must have been a very aggressive
acid
liquid.
It was acid.
Maybe just to put it all in context, it was the year of 2020. Like, oh no, not again. Not going through this one again. A long troubleshooting, something that was quite basic, but yeah, we just overlooked that.
If I get it right.
Welcome to Cisco Tech Stories, a podcast with real-life stories from real-life engineers. Your hosts are Nicholas and Tristan. In today's episode, disconnecting users while troubleshooting comes up perfectly clean, as well as virtually disconnecting Webexes.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Cisco Tech Stories podcast, a podcast where we interview all the experts in Cisco CX. We learn about new technologies, and we hear fun stories about troubleshooting and interesting cases. I'm your host, Nicholas. I'm a technical leader in wireless, and I'm here with my co-host, Tristan, a technical leader and service provider.
Hello, Nico.
Hi, Tristan. We're welcoming today Steven. Hi, Steven. I think your career is interesting. You've been moving recently, so tell us.
Hello, Nicholas and Tristan. Thanks for having me, first of all. Indeed, so let me maybe just give a brief overview of my current career path. So, first, I joined in a small company where I was doing system testing, especially around voice networks. And then after a year, I moved to the Cisco TAC, where I joined in the telepresence collaboration team. And currently in Cisco for about 9 years. It should be something like that. And so first within telepresence, we had several things going on. We had the acquisition of Acano, so that was a new product that came in. Different kind of troubleshooting to handle. I also did some rotation into cloud collaboration. So I had some exposure on how to work with Webex, which was also quite different from on-prem infrastructures. And then recently, about a small year ago, made the move into next-gen firewall or security as a technical leader. That's high level, the overview.
Nice. Thank you. I think your stories are about collaboration, right?
Yeah, correct. So I must say I did have some interesting cases in security, but I must say in collab I had some even more funny ones, really ones that I needed to dig deep into or that came up into my mind immediately when heard about the podcast.
We'll invite you next year, and you're going to tell us firewall stories. But
who knows?
In the meantime, let's go with your collab stories. What do you have for us?
Yeah. So we're going to start up first with one that was more related to cloud collab in some way, and so the customer reported up an issue like our telepresence endpoint ended up the meeting unexpectedly on somewhere in September 2020. They provided the Webex meeting ID, and they also provided the endpoint log file. So far, everything seems to be fine. We get multiple kind of cases like that. So what we usually do is we first gather some details about, okay, did it disconnect multiple times? Were there other endpoints disconnected as well? Was there still media? So there's just some general questions to understand, okay, what's the impact of it? Aside from that, we have a look at our dashboard at Webex. We can see, okay, when people joined, when people disconnect, various statistics about media, etc. And then we try to correlate that as well with our endpoint logs. So quite often these kind of cases relate to a firewall disconnecting the session, or there was no media connection for 30 seconds, at which point it also disconnects the call. So that's something that we usually do see.
In my mind, at this stage, I'm thinking also packet loss, right? If you have an internet bandwidth problem or whatever, right? That's what you have in mind as well.
Yeah, correct. So at least back in that time, it was like if the connection doesn't receive 30 seconds of audio or video, it will assume that maybe the endpoint has crashed or the connection is fully lost, and then indeed it will just remove that user from the meeting, so that other users don't get confused about, hey, is that person still there? Yes or no. So indeed that's something we do see common. Now that's not what we saw here. What we saw here in the endpoint logs, as well as on Webex side, is that the user himself disconnected the meeting. So the endpoint logs showed up that the user sent the disconnect command.
Let me guess, it was not that easy, right?
No, indeed. It was, but that was the first thing that we asked, of course, to say like, hey, we did see here in the logs that the end user disconnected it. So are you sure they didn't misclick or something like that? So like, no.
Are you really sure it did misclick? Really sure? Yeah.
So, and what we did see as well is that they entered in some DTMF commands. So, and that could be because they change up some layouts, etc. So that could be one of the reasons why. In those cloud collab cases, we often needed to interact with a system admin. So the system admin then needs to communicate with the end users, and you know how things go. There might always be some kind of information loss. So we need to take some things with a grain of salt and then maybe reiterate some of the questions as well. Indeed, the customer did press some DTMF digits to change up the layout. So, okay, we didn't really look into that any further. But then, a couple of days later, they came back with additional stories from end users who were also getting disconnected. And at first we were, okay, what is common between them? And what has recently happened? And there was a recent upgrade on the firmware of those endpoints. There were all telepresence endpoints, an MX800, RoomKit, multiple ones. But the common factor was that they all had the same kind of firmware. So, okay, let's try to see what can we do. What we usually do is we ask to run some debug logging. Now, the problem on those endpoints is that the debug logging only runs for 3 to 5 minutes. And because the issue was so random, it was very hard to say, like, hey, please run the debug logging and wait for the issue to reoccur. We'd need to constantly run it. So that was very hard to do. We had something else maybe. Because the path was going via on-prem servers, we might try to see, okay, let's see if the server logs maybe indicate us something else. So we asked for that information as well. A couple of days later, I think they were testing quite extensively, and that was great for us as well, because they managed actually to get the debug logging. So they tried to connect with an endpoint constantly, and eventually they managed to reproduce it with the debug logging on. So we got the debug logging, great. Unfortunately, nothing really more into it. It still said like, disconnect from the end user. Like, okay, good. Let's maybe think a little bit more on it.
Disconnect from end user kind of means you ended the call, right? It does not refer to a packet loss or something non-voluntary.
It's really like the user pressed the red button on the touch panel and closed the call, right?
Yeah, correct. what was common about all of these different endpoints is the touch panel. So I don't know whether you have seen maybe in the office or so, the various kind of bigger endpoints, they have a central touch panel. And that touch panel is placed on the table where users sit. And that touch panel, from there, they could then end the call, but also enter in DTMF digits and so. So what we did is we just replaced all of the touch panels for which they face the issue.
But how pervasive was it? Because if it's just one endpoint doing this, you have a faulty touch panel, right? Easy peasy. But
no, yeah, indeed. So
it seems it was not just one device.
It was just, pressure was building up because they started to see the issue more often as well. So it's like, okay, we don't really know. Let's just replace all of the touch panels. Let's say maybe they ordered them all in bunch and they all had a particular issue. Who knows? So we send them out. Okay, everything seemed to be running fine. 1-2 weeks, all okay. And then suddenly reports started showing up again. We're like, okay, what is happening here? So we asked for one of the systems that was having the disconnects at a regular time to send them over to us. So we have something called engineering failure analysis, where these kind of hardware issues or something that we want to see, that we can at least have a look at it ourselves. So we received one of those units, or the engineering team received them. They plugged them into a telepresence endpoint at our end. And they could see as well these kind of disconnects. So we could reproduce this thing. And then what they were doing is they were going to closely look at those touch panels. And they did see that indeed touch panels, the surface was not the same as a completely fresh one. So they did see it was kind of like a deteriorated touch panel. And we asked them, the customer, okay, what do you do with those touch panels? What happens with them? And they said, okay, we just clean them, and there is some cleaning happening with those ones. So we were, already thinking in that kind of direction. The cleaning causes for an issue on the touch panel, causing for ghost touches. That explained as well why we were seeing those random DTMF digits in there. Because we're just pressing the screen or seem to be pressing the screen and then entering a DTMF digit. But in order to really validate on that, we send out a bunch of replacements for those touch panels. But then we also told the customer, on half of the touch panels, don't do anything on them. So either don't use that room, or say to the cleaning personnel, do not clean those touch panels. The other ones, they could still do it. And then indeed, we could see that the ones that were not cleaned, those remained functional up and running as well. But the other ones were facing the issue. Yeah, in that way, we proved it was a cleaning. We asked what were their cleaning procedures, etc.
So you just proved it was.
And then eventually the telepresence engineering team came up with a procedure on how to properly clean the equipment. Maybe just to put it all in context, it was the year of 2020 where COVID happened. People started to come back to the office, and especially at the beginning, there was quite a lot of heavy cleaning procedures.
I remember even in the Cisco office, we had they were guaranteeing us that there was a special cleaning, and they would really disinfect every phone, every device. But there's no guarantee that this cleaning company knows how touch panels, touchscreen work, or if they need any special care, or they might actually care so much that they use a product that is a super great disinfectant, but will just kill your panel.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, actually, do you know what product they were using?
I don't remember exactly, but I know that we don't advise to use a certain percentage of alcohol. If it goes above a certain percentage of isopropyl alcohol or something like that, then it seems like that was having a negative effect on the touch panels.
It was eating the surface of that touch panel.
So that was one of the recommendations. Don't use something with more than 70% of alcohol. And then I think another recommendation is to not directly spray it on the device, but rather spray in a soft cloth and then wipe it off from the touch panel as such.
I'm interested in the troubleshooting process because if I understand correctly, there was no way in the logs you could have pinpointed this type of issue, right? Like you can get all the logs you want. You just see, keys are being pressed, but people just say they're not pressing keys. So then you start to enter a mode where you troubleshoot physical stuff, right? Try this. Let's do this on half. Let's try, we replace, but then see how long it takes for the issue to appear again.
It's also very easy to keep blaming the user.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was only because as soon as the touch panels were sent back to our engineering team, that we could see that there was a clear difference between completely new ones and other ones, where slight even, I think they could even see it from just putting two touch panels next to each other. They could see, okay, there is something weird here with the panel itself. It doesn't have the same shiny touch as the other one. So
that must have been a very aggressive
acid
liquid.
It was acid.
If you can see the difference, yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how it went initially after COVID, I guess. Kills everything, not only the germs.
Okay, I think you have another story for us.
Yeah. The other one is a more, let's say, more really technical element. Also somewhat relating to Webex. But this was more on a hybrid environment. So customer was having...
What's hybrid environment for those laymen like me who have no idea?
Hybrid means that we have partially on-prem, but also some parts in the cloud. So what does that mean here in practice is we had a whole bunch of infrastructure running at the customer, on-prem meeting servers, conference bridges that were running and were already installed on their premise basis. So in the various locations of their offices, they had those ones. They had telepresence endpoints, and they were connecting to that. With hybrid work and people working either at remote sites or working from home, it was quite often that we want to make that connection from the office, but also to the home workers. So what it was doing, it was making a connection from the on-prem conference bridges over to Webex, so that everyone would be able or would be in the same meeting, basically. So a little bit maybe more about the topology of that infrastructure. We had a telepresence meeting server. That one has an integration with Outlook. So if people schedule meetings via Outlook, the management server would know, okay, I need to schedule in that conference. I need to allocate conference bridge resources on-prem and then also make that connection over to Webex. The TMS server, management server, was then connecting and reaching out to Conductor. Conductor was our solution. If you have multiple conference bridges, how can you efficiently use all of the resources and potentially link them up together if your meeting just grows up in size? And then the Conductor in need was then communicating with the individual conference bridges, whether that was like an MCU or a telepresence server. So that was a little bit the infrastructure. And it was just a little bit before Thanksgiving that there was a P1 case opened up. And they reported that they had a whole lot of video participants that were connected to on-prem conference bridges that had lost or were not able to connect to the users on Webex. So you had two separate meetings. You had the people who were running on Webex, who were thinking, hey, where are the people in the office? And why is that person not online or not in the meeting? And vice versa as well for people in the office. So that was making quite annoying, and they needed to reschedule the meetings in order to make sure that those go out fine again. So it was a very intermittent issue.
So like they set a new meeting and then it would work, right? So that's why it's intermittent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And in most of the cases, yes. They just reschedule the meeting, same kind of participants. 99% of all of the cases, it just worked out fine. It was just occasionally that was hitting issues. So
still annoying for the business.
Yeah.
Right? People complain that their meetings are problematic,
and then
everyone is late 10 minutes because of those problems, etc. Okay.
Yeah, indeed. So that was the reason why it was also escalated as a P1 call. I think there were like higher management meetings who got impacted because of that, and immediately gets the attention. So, okay, let's say, we jumped just on the Webex. We were looking at from the management server, and we tried to see, okay, what is happening? What can we just see? At first sight, we didn't really see much. We only saw some timeouts that it was reporting from the management server over to the conductor in EMEA. So they had conductors at different regions in EMEA, North America, and then APJC. But they only saw the timeouts in the ones of EMEA. So, okay, timeouts. Let's start first with packet captures. Let's see that there's no issue network-wise.
Firewall blocking again. Everyone blaming the firewall.
No. Usually, yes, but this time it was not. So we did see communication. There was perfect three-way handshake. On TCP level, there was some communication. But then at some point in time, the TMS server, the management server, was actually disconnecting the session. The problem here was that everything was encrypted. Everything of those communication is encrypted. So just packet captures on their own, unless we can clearly see a disconnect, were not really helping much. So we needed to look.
So you see encrypted traffic and then nothing, right? And then it's like, okay, disconnected, but what? There's no explanation to it, right?
Yeah, indeed. So it was actually interesting because it was the management server who was disconnecting it. So we were like, why does the management server indicate there is a timeout? Because he disconnects that session himself. And okay, so let's see what is in that communication. So we enabled debug logging on both the TMS and the conductor to just see what are the various requests. And it was quite a big customer. They had a whole bunch of meetings, so debug logging started to become quite aggressive, I must say. So
what do you mean aggressive? Like it takes a lot of space, it's very verbose, or it actually affects the CPU and like you're afraid to enable debug because it's going to kill the box?
Well, you always have some kind of impact when you have debug logging. Now we were not too afraid about that part, because we did see that CPU-wise, both on conductor and on the management server, we were not really having high spikes. So we said like, okay, we need to do something anyway. We know it's going to be negatively impacting performance, but if we don't, then we don't know what is going to be the root cause here, and we will be facing those kind of issues over and over again. So that was a little bit, and that's a trade-off you always need to make with debug logging. Couple of days later, and then every single day they were reporting issues. Either it was failing over to a different conductor, so going from EMEA to North America, meaning that local people in EMEA, they were actually connecting with their endpoints all the way to a conference bridge in North America. So that just introduced delay that you don't want to have. So that was one of the things, and then similarly loses connection to Webex, or the Webex was not set up. Multiple kind of reports. And we then had Thanksgiving. With Thanksgiving, load was a whole lot less. A lot of people on PTO during that time. And the issue didn't occur again. So that made us think, okay, this seems to be something load related, as we can clearly see. And we do know it's only happening on the EMEA ones. Okay, good. We gathered various debug logging.
Was there more load in EMEA, or?
There was a little bit more load in EMEA compared to the other regions. Not to say 100% more.
Nothing abnormal.
But there was just a little bit more load. I don't remember the exact percentages, but maybe there was 10% more load in EMEA compared to other regions. So, okay, we had the debug logging. So we went into them and tried to figure them out. So we did see the API requests coming from the management server arriving on the conductor. But then sometimes it was just not responding. Or at least we did see a request, but then the response took 30 seconds or so before it was actually responding to the management server. But yeah, the management server had a timeout of, I think, about 30 seconds. And then it displayed
answering too late is like not answering.
Yeah, correct. And if it happens, like, I don't think a single failure was causing issues. It was, I think, once you have 3 failures on a particular meeting, then indeed it's going to say, this conductor is not in a healthy state, so it was going to switch it over, or trying to switch it over.
But at that stage, like, if I see delay in answering, I'm thinking, okay, the device is on a high CPU. But you said there was no CPU spike either, right? So you did check the logs, and there was no signs of high CPU either.
No, indeed. So
that's
that was quite weird, and then we needed to find out why is it taking so much time of 30 seconds before you get a response on an API request. But that's abnormally long for any kind of API, unless you need to do heavy data crunching or something like that. But this was just creating up a meeting. And okay, the conductor needed to communicate with the various conference bridges to see whether there is still space available to host a particular meeting. But yeah, it should be quite simple queries. So we couldn't really figure that one out. And we had a couple of ways or routes that we wanted to take in troubleshooting, because we just didn't have any clue what was causing this. So one of the things we wanted to do is do some benchmarking. So what did we do there is, which we just said, okay, let's run the debug logging on every single conductor in each of the regions, North America, EMEA, and APJC, both at a busy time as well as a non-busy time. And then, we'll try to see from that data what is the amount of API requests it does get, what is the average response time, and which were response times that were higher than, let's say, 2 seconds or so, or even 1 second.
You're basically benchmarking all the servers
Yeah.
compared to each other.
Correct. So just to see whether, is this maybe something that we have some timeouts or at least longer response times happening as well in the other conductors, but that in EMEA, just because the load is higher, that it was just going up to 30 seconds, or was there something else? Now the problem with those debug logging was that a single request was covering multiple pages in my notepad. So I couldn't do this manually. So we built up a small script to just analyze that, filter it out, and put it out in an Excel file. So we could easily get the log file, run it to a Python script, and within a couple of seconds, immediately get an output saying, okay, this is the average time. These were the requests that timed out or took longer than 2 seconds. And no surprise there. We did see on EMEA there were higher response times. But on the other servers, we didn't see as many of them. There were a few, but definitely not going over 30 seconds. So, okay, we tried to see what can we do here. CPU.
What did that piece of info bring you? It's like, yes, there is a bit more load on the EMEA server, but that does not justify the huge increase in response time, right? Like the other servers are performing well, so there must be a problem on that EMEA server because it's not just performing a little bit worse; it's like very, very bad. So I guess that was the conclusion.
Yeah, indeed, that was kind of like what we wanted to achieve and see. Okay, we know there is a little bit more load. We wanted to see how much more load. And then we could also check with engineering what were their benchmark testing. So that was one of the things that engineering was doing as well. They were doing benchmark testing again on this new software version that the customer had installed. And they just couldn't reproduce the same. So they were even hitting the same kind of meeting numbers or even more, but they just couldn't reproduce that as well.
I guess it's also not easy to reproduce, right? Because all that load is typically simulated in the lab. You can create a lot of meetings, a lot of endpoints joining, but you're never really like real life where you have a meeting going on and someone joining from far away, and then the meeting is rescheduled, and all the stuff that happens in the real enterprise, that is much harder to simulate. Like,
no.
We can approach that, but it's never real life.
No. Well, and it actually reminds me of something else where I know definitely at COVID times, and that was something that we could reproduce in a way. People were scheduling a whole lot more Webex meetings, and every time at the top of the hour, we had meeting failures as well. And that was just because there were too many requests all at the same time happening, and the servers of Webex were just not built to scale on that. So I know that at that point in time, Webex BU scaled up on those servers, but sometimes the workaround.
I remember they asked us to schedule the meetings at 5 past the hour instead of 00. That was funny.
You could be creative, and that was a nice one. But yeah, coming back to our scenario here, we were just checking with engineering. Okay, what can we do in order to reduce the load on those servers? We had a couple of things. We could try to separate traffic, maybe. So they had scheduled meetings, but also some ad hoc meetings. So an ad hoc meeting is when you, let's say I'm calling with a colleague A, but then I need to have the expertise of colleague B as well. And then we just engage him into that meeting. It creates up a meeting ad hoc, or at least at that moment, on the conference bridge, and then you could have your meeting as well. So that was one of the ideas. Let's try to split off scheduled and ad hoc meetings. Problem with that is it requires quite a lot of dial plan changes. So it was not something we could easily apply. Another idea was reduce the API load on the conductor. The conductor was also being queried by a monitoring system, and that was Prime. So we asked, could we maybe just disable those requests from Prime? And the customer said, no, we can't do that because we use Prime for monitoring our meetings. So we cannot do that. The system has been designed in this way. Okay, good. Let's go back and see what else can we do. Okay, we had on the conductor, we needed to reach out to each of the different conference bridges. We had them defined using FQDN as a best practice. We said, okay, is it maybe taking too much time in resolving those ones? Let's try to convert them to IP addresses.
Yeah, it's always DNS. Everybody knows that, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, no change. What the issue was still happening. So, okay. We were going back into the traces of the commands and the API requests. And I was looking, okay, is there maybe one particular kind of API requests, a particular function that was taking more time on average than all of the other ones? But again, there, I didn't see anything. So I couldn't really see like conference.create was taking up a whole lot more time than participant.add functionality. So they were all impacted, it seems like. So that would either mean that it's a common part of the code that was impacted, and it was not one particular function. If it would be one particular function, it would be easier for engineering to add in maybe some debug logging and say step by step, where did it halt? But that was not the case as well. And then at some point in time, we were thinking, okay, what else could it be? And suddenly we had the idea, okay, the conductor is a virtual machine. Let's just check what are the settings on the virtual machine on the ESXi. And at that point in time, we did notice that there was no CPU reservation set for that particular VM in EMEA, and therefore it was just at a best effort basis. The ESXi in EMEA was hosting a whole bunch of other VMs, which were also consuming CPU cycles. And so we suggested them, okay, our documentation states with these kind of resources fixed. So they have fixed CPU reservation. And they did that overnight. And then indeed, we just monitored it, just kept on running fine. So that was basically in the end, after a long troubleshooting, something that was quite basic, but we just overlooked that.
If I get it right, if you don't have CPU reservation, that means technically you can allocate more CPUs than you actually have. If your host, I don't know, let's say has 100 CPU cores, you can have VMs using 120 because they're not physically reserved. It's not CPU core 20 goes to that VM, 21 goes to that VM, right? So if you have some VMs that are not busy, it's fine. They can load balance, they can share a core, but here, this particular VM was not thinking it was busy, but other VMs were actually blocking the resource, right? So it was being starved and didn't have access to a CPU. Okay.
It's basically oversubscription of CPU cores, right?
Yes, indeed. So that was, especially for all of our collab products, we have most of them are virtualized even. And it's stated explicitly in each one of them, you should set up CPU reservations so that both your CPU and memory as well is fully allocated to that box. Just because of conferencing or at least collaboration in general is quite time sensitive, so you cannot have those kind of delays. Maybe other kind of VMs, it's less important that it is maybe just a little bit slower. But yeah, here it was causing an issue.
Sorry, it rings a bell in my technology in wireless because we have the same kind of restrictions. And we also say that hyper-threading is not supported. People say, well, all our servers support hyper-threading, so what do you want us to do, right? But the idea is literally the same, that we want, if the device, the server is benchmarked to use 4 CPU, it will rely, it has 4 CPU cores. And if you keep hyper-threading enabled, you actually have 2 real CPU cores and 2 that do not exist. It's just the hyper-threading accepting more threads, but it's not an actual CPU core. So you're running on 2 cores and a half or something, not exactly 4, right? And that's annoying, but we just want to have the resources allocated, right? For critical servers, critical devices, they need to be allocated.
No, indeed. And yeah, going back to the case, it was running fine, but then 2 or 3 weeks later, they came back and they say like, hey, we're now facing the issue in North America. I was like, oh no, not again. Not going through this one again. So I said like, okay, let me just see what was the issue the last time on CPU reservation. Can you maybe just send me a screenshot or show me what is the CPU reservation in North America? And okay, they did that. And there we could see, okay, they only allocated half of the resources. So I said like, okay, make sure it is properly set. And then ever since has been running out fine. So.
Luckily this time it was very fast to solve it.
Yeah, indeed. This time, this time it was a little bit easier to handle.
I think it's getting very tricky with virtual machines because they're more and more popular and they're extremely practical. Like you can, you have like UCS servers or whatever, and you're just sharing resources. But people have questions. Oh, do we support vMotion? Do we support? There's a lot of fancy features from any of the virtualization vendors. We have nothing against those, but sometimes that feature, if it takes a snapshot of the VM or what, it can freeze the VM for a second or two because it's doing something very intensive. It's moving it to another server farm or whatever. And depending on where that other server farm is, or it can always introduce a small freeze or small delay. And then you have unintentional switchovers if you have high availability, or your server just freezes for a second and that can cause some disruption. So it's not that we don't support it, but it can have an impact. And it sometimes it's smooth and sometimes it's not. So that's always, I think, tricky. I had a question more on the technology to wrap up, because everyone knows if you speak about collaboration, there's hardwired IP phones. We have conference, rooms, telepresence, Webex boards, etc. Then there's Webex conferencing, but you kind of alluded to a lot more components than we think exist. I also know there's IPCC where you have a lot of fancy features for call centers, etc. Can you just depict us what are the components in collaboration world, like different kind of teams, type of technologies and products we have?
I think there's a big separation to say like we have on-prem and we have cloud-based. I think as far as I know, we have as much parity between what we have on-prem and what we have in cloud. I think on-prem definitely has still more features than cloud, but I think most of the commonly used features should be available in cloud, and I think there's definitely further development on that one still. I'm more focused on-prem, so I have a little bit of a perspective on cloud, but I'm going to focus this question on on-prem. And the heart of it is the call manager. Call manager is the component where all of your calls come into, but it also has that integration with contact center, has your connection to the conference bridges, has a connection to the voice gateways, and then what we did in telepresence as well, we had the expressways, which were making the connection out to the internet, to make SIP calls to Webex, for example, or to other kind of vendors as well. So indeed, it's a whole kind of infrastructure, but usually call manager is really the heart of it. I wouldn't say every single collaboration solution goes through that one, but I think quite a lot.
Tristan, you have a closing question?
Yeah, I have another question actually, a bit unrelated. You recently moved to security, right? You had a strong background in all those collaboration tech that we spoke about. What was your surprise factor when you arrived in security? What's the thing that you didn't expect in the technology, in the product, in whatever? How did it happen?
I think initially when I was joining into security, I was thinking, okay, this is more on inspecting the traffic. I was thinking it's going to go kind of like similar as to collaboration, more into like a layer 7 approach, and really digging down on the application. Now what we do see in TAC is that it's a whole lot more networking, routing, switching that is being engaged. So yeah, that's something I need to adjust to, or needed to adjust to, compared to my TAC experience in collaboration. So I think that was one, for me at least, one of the differences, I must say. And aside from that, I think the entire width of the security portfolio that we have in Cisco is there's a whole lot of integrations from firewall to various components, being umbrella, but also a lot of other components. And I must say, not every single day, but from time to time, I still see some new components showing up. So
thank you very much. Actually, it was very interesting stories that you reported. I like really your methodical approach in both of them. It was very nice laid out and step-by-step approach for troubleshooting. So it was very interesting. Also learned a lot about how these Webex applications work. So thank you very much again, Steven. It was very nice having you on the podcast today. So thank you.
And let's talk in a year for a firewall story.
Yeah,
right?
I will have a thought about it, and see whatever I come across. Might check out with some colleagues. I'm pretty sure they will have some interesting stories about firewall as well. So.
I'm sure there is.
Thank you very much then.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Steven. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Cisco Tech Stories podcast. You can subscribe to us on Cisco Podcast Network and SoundCloud, or in your favorite podcasting app. You can also find us on X at Cisco Tech Story without S. Thanks again for listening, and speak to you next month.